The two paths forward put forth by Heidegger in his enigmatic contributions to philosophy of the event, very poetic prose here. What we're looking for is to ground the truth of being. Being in its more concealed originary sense, spelled with a Y. So we're going to explore the history of Western philosophy and its fruits with regards to the understanding of being and of truth versus what the event, the decision, may hold for the future ones. So Heidegger says, all Western thinking has been accustomed for so long, and not only just in the modern era, to a superficial view of the human being as a rational animal, that it is difficult now to take words and concepts of an apparently fixed anthropological, psychological content and utter them out of a wholly other truth. And in order to ground that truth without falling victim to the anthropological misinterpretation and the facile rejoinder that indeed everything is anthropological, quote unquote, anthropological. What does that mean? Can we use the language that has been conditioned to now a new concept, a new subject, a new metaphysics of the anthropological? Can we break the spell of Western metaphysics with a language that casted it? I'd say that's the question being asked here. And he's going to, again, juxtapose the state of things in the West today versus what may be, which is the grounding of the truth of being with a Y in its most originary sense. He says the cheapness of this objection is so boundless that it must be suspected. What lies behind it is the fact that no one never wants to place the human being, i.e. oneself, into question. Perhaps because one is secretly not so very sure of the anthropological splendor of mankind. So the question, there's a barrier to entry to the question of the truth of being, because the response in terms of the anthropological worldview is not so splendorous, as he says here. All right, now here are the decisions. Decisions whether the human being wishes to remain the subject, the quote-unquote subject, on the one hand, which is the current trajectory of the and framing historical, or whether the human being grounds Dasein. Grounds Dasein. 2, whether along with subject, quote-unquote subject, quote-unquote animal is to remain enduringly as quote-unquote substance, and quote-unquote rationale or rational is to remain as quote-unquote culture on the one hand. Or whether the truth of being with a Y will find in Dasein a future abode. Continuing, whether beings take being as their quote-unquote most general feature and thereby deliver being up to quote-unquote ontology and thus bury it on the one hand, right? That is the history of Western philosophy, according to Heidegger, from the pre-Socratics to Nietzsche, that the understanding and interpretation of being, this flash, this revelation that happened in the first beginning as the most general category of beings as such, that's the initial area. Are we going to continue, which was built into the philosophy of ontology, of Western ontology? Heidegger saying that actually buried the truth of being with a Y. So this obsession with beings and the and categorizing being as beings as the most general category has buried the truth of being with a Y. And he says here, or, right? So either we have Western ontology, or whether being with a Y and its uniqueness will come to words and will pervasively attune beings in their non-repeatability. So more clues as to what this new beginning, this event may inaugurate for Heidegger here. Being in its uniqueness and in beings and their non-repeatability, being in its uniqueness, and beings in their non-repeatability. What do you think that means? What comes up for you when you hear that? Continuing, whether truth is correctness, right? The correspondence theory of truth, experiment matches theory. Whether truth is correctness deteriorates into the certainty of representation, right? Which in our world we can think of, I think, came up for me, simulation, simulacra. Right? Certainty of representation and the security of calculation. So whether truth, on the one hand, as correctness deteriorates into the certainty of representation and the security of calculation, and lived experience. So these are the three phenomenon of the end of history of Western metaphysics that we're in right now, which is the certainty of representation, the security of calculation, and of lived experience. On the other hand, or whether the initially ungrounded essence of aletheia comes to be grounded as the clearing of the self-concealing. Or whether the initially, remember this is juxtaposed against the truth is correctness, representation, calculation, and lived experience. Or whether the initially ungrounded essence of aletheia, which means truth, it's a Greek term that in Greek is truth. Aletheia means it, in Heidegger uses this term in sense of an unconcealment, a revealing, comes to be grounded as the clearing of the self-concealing. Let me know what that means to you if in the comments. Continuing on here with these juxtapositions. So whether beings, as the most self-evident, rigidify everything, moderate, small, and average, into the rational, on the one hand, right? That's the reign of quantity, right? Whether beings, as the most self-evident, right? The being of beings that we've discovered through, now modern science, rigidify everything, moderate, small, and average, into the rational, or whether what is most question-worthy constitutes the genuineness of being with a Y. So that is our option, a cryptic option here. I don't know, we have to make sense of it. Whether what is most question-worthy constitutes the genuineness of being. Continuing on art. So whether art as an arrangement of lived experience, which Heidegger is claiming that is the sense of art in modernity or postmodernity. So whether art is an arrangement of lived experience or the setting into work of truth. The setting into work of truth. What do you think about that? Next, whether history is degraded into an armory of confirmations and precursors, or arises as a chain of strange and unscalable mountains. Or arises as a chain of strange and unscalable mountains. Please, somebody help with the conceptual framing of that term there. More, whether nature is debased into an exploitable domain of calculation and organization and into an occasion for quote-unquote lived experience, or whether as the self-secluding earth, it bears the open realm of the pictureless world. I love that, right? So this is our enigmatic riddle for the history or the truth of being, right? The self-secluding earth, it bears the open realm of the pictureless world, the invisible world. I'm just going to go on a little bit more here. So I only got a few minutes, but hope you guys are following me here. Continuing, whether the absence of the divine from beings celebrates its triumphs in the Christianization of culture, or whether the plight of the undecidability regarding the nearness and remoteness of the God, small g, prepares a space of decision. Whether humans venture being with a capital Y and thereby venture going under, or whether they content themselves with beings, lowercase b, regular beings. Whether humans still venture a decision at all, or whether they give themselves over to the decisionlessness which our era proposes as the state of highest activity. Decisionlessness. For me, distractedness, confusion. All these decisions, apparently many and varied, converge on the one and only decision. whether being with a Y conclusively withdraws itself, or whether this withdrawal, as refusal, becomes the first truth and the other beginning of history. I'll read it again. So all these decisions that we discussed, these juxtapositions, apparently many and varied, converge on one and only decision, and that's whether being with a Y conclusively withdraws itself, or whether this withdrawal, as refusal, becomes the first truth and the other beginning of history, right? This is in the search of another beginning. What is most difficult and most splendid in the decision in favor of being with a Y secludes itself through its invisibility. If it ever manifested itself, it would doubtlessly be misinterpreted and thereby remain well guarded from every vulgar touch. So it's difficult to elucidate this understanding of being because of its, I guess, quick to fall into misrepresentation or confusion. Why must decision arise at all? Heidegger says here. If they must, then they are necessities of our error, not only at these determinate decisions, but also in general as decisions. I think I'm going to leave it there. So let me know if this made sense to anyone. And I'd like to start a reading group. That was just 2 pages from page 73 in Martin Heidegger's The Contributions of Philosophy of the Event. I find it thought-provoking and philosophically rich with conceptual resources that I would love to explore more. Anybody interested, let me know. Thanks. God bless.